Good afternoon, everyone. Let's begin with a prayer. Please stand. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Moshai, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, beloved friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda Ji, we bow to all of you. Divine Mother, thank you for the gift of Swamiji in our lives. And Swamiji, thank you for your wisdom, your support and encouragement, your example of perfect discipleship, and your divine friendship. We are blessed. Om. Peace. Amen. Please be seated and we'll start with some music. Oh, yes. Okay. Don't get into it too much. To our left, Sandra.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love Summer fade and winter draw near. My Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempests, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend. Some men call it progress, down with those who doubt. To join the causes others join and shout when others shout. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Some men lack the daring ever to be free. They shun the heights and crowd the depths and court security. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Cowards see but pride in singularity. Oh, never mind if men are wrong, so long as they agree. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Claim the power within you, error to defy. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. So our subject this afternoon is Swamiji's legacy, which is a daunting subject in any length of time. But I think if anyone can do it justice today, our panel of speakers can. There will be 6 speakers on our panel, and I'd like to introduce them to you for those of you who may not know them. Swami Jaya, one of the founding members of Ananda and one of the leaders of Ananda, India. And then Swamis Kirtani and Anand. Are the leaders of Ananda Center in Assisi, Italy, and Europe generally. And then Shurjo and Narayani. They served together at Ananda Center in Delhi, India. Shurjo was one of the original members of Ananda's community in Pune. They recently moved to Delhi. And Narayana, as many of you know, was Swamiji's personal assistant for the last few years of his life. And finally, Swami Asha. Also one of the earliest members of Ananda, and along with her husband, Swami David, she leads Ananda Center in Palo Alto, California. So I turn it over to you, Jaya. Thank you.
Thank you, Gyandev, and thank all of you. It's such an honor for myself and on behalf of the other speakers to be able to speak about Swami on this very auspicious day. It's only been 2 years since Swamiji has passed, but in some ways for me personally it seems like a lot longer. And perhaps that's because in the 2 years since Swamiji's passing so much has happened with me. Not so much outwardly, but inwardly. I feel that the lessons, the spiritual lessons that have come to me within the last couple of years have been profound. And honestly, I think I can say something is probably shared by many of you as well, that I feel Swamiji much more strongly now than I did before. And perhaps that's because he was always with us. I've been 45 years or so with Swamiji, and he was always there. He was always there for us. And so because of that, perhaps I took him for granted in that way. But now that he's been gone, I've felt his presence very strongly within me. And I also suspect this is the case with you. And many of you have said the same thing. How does one do justice to speaking about the legacy of such a one as Swamiji? I remember Swamiji saying many times, and you've heard him say this also before, that the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, as great as it was and as recognized as a great saint as he was, during his time on earth in the first half of the 20th century, is looked at very differently than it will probably be looked upon 2, 3, 4 centuries in the future. When people look back, people will see him in a very different way. And I think the same thing will be with Swamiji. Yes, he was a great saint, and our master was a great saint, recognized as such. But Swamiji said in the future, people will look back upon him as the guru of this age that we have entered into. And when people look back on that, if this proves to be true, and I do believe it will be true, when they look back upon that, they'll also see Swami there by his side. He served 65 years, his entire adult life, with one mission: to make his guru's name better known, his teachings widespread, and to serve as a true disciple. He was a good disciple. You know that phrase. That was very dear to Swami, to be remembered that way, and certainly that is the case. And so we come here today together to speak about his legacy. But his legacy is many things. We know of his books and we know of his music. I think those stand on their own. They'll be remembered by their merits, surely. And of course, there's the legacy of his creative works through communities. All of you, many of you, living in those communities. And we know what Master said about communities. One day they will spread like wildfire. So those too will stand. All of those creative works on their own merits, they speak for themselves. But who speaks for the inner person? That person that was so dear to all of us, that person that we knew personally in our lives, who interceded on our behalf in so many different ways. Swami was such a unique man. And I think it was that uniqueness that attracted me to him. I was drawn to him because he was not like anybody else I had ever met. And I think the reason was because he spoke, he acted, he was from the center out. He didn't wear the clothing of anything around him. The attitudes, the fads, the things that were popular, he didn't wear those. He always acted from inside of himself. He was a great man, we know that. And he affected and touched every one of our lives. He was wise, surely. He was knowledgeable as well. He was a kind man. He was compassionate. He was helpful. He was generous. He was thoughtful. On and on I could go. He was also challenging. And he challenged us, too. Each one of us were challenged a little bit by him in a good way. And sometimes we stumbled. And when we did, he supported us. You know, he would never allow us to say we ever failed. He said we had not yet succeeded yet. But when those times came, he was there to support us. I'd like to share one story. Many years ago, this was in the earlier days of Ananda, in the first 5 years or so, there was a fellow who did stumble. He made many mistakes. He made in his behavior, his life. And he, unfortunately, because his mistakes were such and very public, they were criticized quite heavily by people in the community. And the man ultimately left. And it was perhaps because of that criticism as well. And at that time, I had to meet with Swamiji for it was some other affair that was going on, and I had to meet with them and discuss. And as we begin our meeting, Swamiji looked at me. The first thing he says, "Tell me, what do you think about this situation with so-and-so?" And I hesitated because I didn't know quite how to answer. I wanted to please Swamiji, you see, and I wanted to say the right thing. But yet I thought, what is the right thing? And so I said, well, I'll just say what I feel. And I says, well, Swamiji, this so-and-so, obviously he made some bad mistakes. But what troubles me is not so much that, but the fact that he's been so heavily criticized by our members. And Swamiji paused, and I could see he liked that response. And he said, if your friends, you cannot rely upon them in the times of your troubles, when can you count upon them? And I've always remembered that. He was a true and loyal friend. They're always to support us, to support one another, to be able to see us through our hardships and through our trials. And when he himself had difficulties, he turned to Master, and Master, he felt that support from Master. But there was a time he didn't feel that support. As you know, in his early life, he was turned out of SRF, and it was a very dark period in his life. He felt that Master had abandoned him, withdrawn that support. And of course it wasn't true, but Swami knew intellectually it wasn't true, but yet his heart was grieving. And he prayed to Master, and he said, Master, you may reject me, but I will never, ever abandon you. And that was Swami's life. He never abandoned his mission that was given to him by his guru. Now, I said his outer works, they'll be remembered, they're his legacy, and they don't need to speak for themselves. I mean, they do speak for themselves, but who will speak for that inner Swami, that person that we all came to love? And I think you know the answer. All of us here are his living legacy. He's touched all of us in some way, or you would not be here. In some way, all of us have been changed in some little bit. And we don't know how much that is, some little and some great, but we are his living legacy. And through us, Swami's life continues and passes on. The ideals that he shared, what he stood for in his life, the values that he espoused, the teachings that were brought to life, not through the written word, but the teachings that were brought to life through his daily life have been transmitted on to all of us. Each one of us has to take that as our responsibility. And from generation to generation, this is his living legacy that must be passed on. He once told us, he said, remember, giving students who come, those who come here, the teachings is not enough. You must give them bliss. You must give them God. You must give them that touch of bliss. And how do we do that? That's our responsibility. If we're going to give that to somebody, isn't it true that we must possess it first ourselves? And so this is our challenge. It's our opportunity. It's our blessing to be able to serve in this work in this way, to be able to be given the opportunity to try, to be able to embrace this mission, to be able to embrace this challenge, to reach out and be instruments for Master's blessings, for Swami's blessings, and for his presence. And this has been the lesson in these last 2 years that I have been meditating upon, and I suspect you too have been meditating upon this very same lesson. I'm going to just speak very shortly and conclude with these words. Swami often would speak to us, and you've heard him say this many times. He said that the great ones came. Master, Jesus Christ, all of the great saints, they came into this world not to show us how great they were, but to show us how great we ourselves potentially can be. And I think this is also the message of Swami as well. He came to show us that what we could be. He demonstrated it through his life, through his unique contribution, through all of the creative efforts that he's given to all of us. And we need to carry that legacy forth and share it through our lives and bless everybody who comes into association with us as representatives of that vibration and that blessing that was Swamiji. Many blessings to all of you.
When we speak about Swamiji, there are certain phrases that can tend to repeat themselves. And one, it comes from Master, and it's one that Swamiji shared with us many times, and that Jaya just mentioned, that these world brotherhood colonies would spread like wildfire. Now, when I first heard this, I didn't know Ananda really deeply or well, but there was a question in the back of my mind: how is this going to happen? And a part of me thinks that Swamiji also must have asked himself many times, how is this going to happen? But he didn't just ask the question. He stayed open and totally receptive in his heart, in his consciousness, to the answer to that question. And he became a deep channel for the answers to that question. When I first came to Ananda, it was the only Ananda community. And while I was living here, the first 10 years of my life with Ananda, there were several ways in which Swamiji opened to other communities happening. Some of you will remember, I don't think we have either of them with us. I haven't seen either of them. When Swamiji first began to consider that he would send someone else out to Sacramento to be a focal point for teaching and expanding the work there. And I'm told that he perhaps brought this up in the beginning with the monks and nuns at the time, and there was quite a number of them. There were maybe 20-some monks and 15 or more nuns, and so it was quite a large group to find from the people who would be willing to go to Sacramento to begin to do a small outreach effort in an area that Swamiji had already been and found a response. And I heard that when he brought this up, there was silence in the room. No one wanted to go out. Why would anyone want to leave this beautiful place to go into a city and be more on their own? Of course, Swamiji was looking far into the future, and he realized that if everyone stayed here, many, many people who are looking for these teachings would not hear about them. And so he plucked Haridas and Vijay from the monastery, and he sent them to Sacramento. In other instances, in other moments, Swamiji was looking for how to start this wildfire. You know, you could hardly say that a Sacramento center is a wildfire. It's more so now. Look what it has grown into. But he also was looking to train those who in the future would be leading the movement that would be moving more like a wildfire and would need those who were trained to lead them, to lead the people who would come. So one of the next moves that happened was the San Francisco house, which was another huge step for those of us who were basically living here at Ananda. Swamiji picked up Jyotish and Devi out of an important role in the community here, and he put them in this big mansion on which hill was it in San Francisco? On Broadway in San Francisco, a house that was big enough to house 20 to 30 people. I'm not sure what the largest number of people was that was there. And in that moment, it probably wasn't easy for Ananda here to do without Jyotish and Devi. But in Swami's vision and openness to how is it ever going to become a wildfire, he realized that more and more people needed to be trained to begin other communities. They would need to be able to handle all of the situations that happened here at Ananda Village, that Swami tended to be the last authority that people would go to in order to have the answers of how to manage things. And for Jyotish and Devi, this moving to San Francisco was an incredible opportunity for them to deal with all of the issues that come up between people who are living together, with people who are coming from outside, because there was all of San Francisco and all of the Bay Area as a fount of people who would be coming to hear the teachings in that center in San Francisco. And Swamiji, I'm sure, knew, even at that time, that he was training the people who would need to take over when he was no longer in the body. There were other communities, other centers where Swamiji put people that he saw as possible future leaders. And I will talk about the one that I have the most experience with, because not in much the same period of time that Jyotish and Devi went to San Francisco, Swamiji was getting many requests from people in Europe. Please, Swamiji, can't you send people here? Can't you start Ananda? Can't we have Ananda in Europe? Because it's very difficult for us to come to America. The exchange rate at that time was very much against the lira, and people couldn't afford to come. And so Swamiji went with a few of us on tour in Europe. And on that tour, he was obviously looking for where a possible community could be in Europe. And we went through England and Holland and Germany, Austria, and finally landed in Italy. And during all of that time, Swamiji would really connect with the people, and those of us who were with him connected with the people. And as we were ready to leave, to come back to the village, he spoke with Puru and I, who were there at the time together, and he brought up the subject. He said, well, it seems like Europe is really ready for a community, an Ananda community. It seems that Italy is really the place where there is the most heart for these teachings, the most openness for living in a different way. I wonder who we could send. And again, there was a great silence. And it's, I don't remember, but it's likely we brought up a few names. And he said, how about you guys? I think you would be very good here. So in fact, within the year, we were planted in Rome in an apartment given generously by Italian friends, and we began to share the teachings. But much more than that, we began to be open in our consciousness to a community, a possibility of a community in a very different situation than the communities in America. The consciousness was different. The heart was different. The politics were different. The bureaucracy was different. Everything was different about having to begin an Ananda community in Europe, except the real basics, which are the teachings that we have to offer and the love of Master and Swamiji that we had to share. We were only there a year and came back here. And then several years later, there was another movement in which Jyotishan Devi ended up going to Como. Our very dear friend Alessandra Rompolotti had a villa near Lake Como, and she offered this as a place where we could begin to create the magnetism for a retreat and community in Europe. And others were there at the time. And I arrived sometime later, Shivani and Arjuna a little bit after that. And I can remember Swamiji again was training all of us for being able to carry on the work when he was gone, because in fact he was going to be leaving soon to come back to America. And two things I can remember from his advice to us. One is that I think we were talking about how difficult it was to cook for Italians, Germans, very different diet, Americans. And we asked, what can we do? How can we really share, give to, serve people through our cooking and in other ways? And one of the things that Swamiji said was, if you are feeding the souls of the people who come to you, everything else will follow. If their souls are nourished, they're not going to worry about whether they're getting pasta every day. They're not going to worry about whether they're getting a healthy diet as they would prefer. They will be so fulfilled through their soul nourishment that everything else will flow. And so that was one of the first things that Swamiji shared with us that we realized later was a part of serving all of Europe, wherever we ended up going, which was in many countries. The other thing he said as he was leaving was there are three very important things for you to do together as a family, as a family community. In Italy, the word comunità actually is much more like a family. And so he said, you should meditate together. It's obvious for a community of Ananda. Serve together. Again, it's part of the two-pronged work that we do, meditating and service. And the third thing he said was a very interesting one, and one that we didn't always remember because we get very busy with our work. He said, have fun together. And all three of these things have been a key for opening ourselves to how we can be channels for this work of community that is supposed to be spreading like wildfire. So I want to get to the point that to me is a part of Swamiji's greatness. Because he's so open, he was so heart open, he was so consciousness open, that when he was in India and he was asked to do television program, I don't know that was his first thought about how he should talk with people, reach people, but he saw the point. So many more people would be reached if he did these television programs. And he did them. And we know that it was of great sacrifice at times for him to do this. His body was not healthy always, but that was always the first point for him, was how can we reach the people? In that case, it was in India. He did the questions and answers with Nirmalan Dharmadas, who, and so he began to be filmed. He was being filmed, and some of this was beginning to be shared on internet. And this was the point that made me really realize how all of this could possibly spread like wildfire. Because we all know how many people the internet today reaches. I think I heard when Swamiji first was asked, can we do a page on the internet for you? Can we put you on Facebook? Can we do? He was not eager because he may have thought of it as he himself did not want to become known. But in the same way that I responded when asked about doing Facebook, and I had no desire to do such a thing, I was told, but this is how people will come to know Ananda Assisi. And I said, oh, well, yes. And that's what Swami did. He said, yes, this is the way that this work, that these colonies, these communities can really spread like wildfire, is by becoming known through this immediate communications effort of the internet. And so each one of us is a part of making the wildfire, creating the wildfire. We know what a wildfire is. It just comes through and it hits everything, And the wildfire of the World Brotherhood colonies is what comes through each one of us. As Jaya has said, as it was said this morning, each one of us being a channel for community, for whether it's the community of one of us individually as the channel for this work, whether it's the community of our family, our individual family, our nuclear family, our family of Ananda that we're sharing, whether it's our meditation group or our colony, or whether it's the World Brotherhood colony that is every single individual who is Master's disciple, who is a Kriyaban. All of you here are a part of the wildfire that will spread through each one of us, individually serving through our internet serving or through our one-to-one service that we can give. I think what the message of who Swami is that I'm trying to make with this is that he would never say no. That if there was any opportunity with which he could reach people, with which he could share Master's teaching, if there was any opportunity through which he could touch the lives of one person or tens of thousands of people, he would say yes to that opportunity. And I think that is a message for each one of us. We all have opportunities that come to us to be able to serve, to be able to share, to be able to give what Swamiji has given to each one of us. And I would say, try to always say yes, and let that be your opportunity for growth, for sharing, and for honoring Swamiji through saying yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Jayaji said, I too feel very deeply honored to be here in front of you today, but I also feel a little bit terrified. Not because I'm worried about myself, but I'm always terrified to speak about Swami. I always feel I don't know him yet, and somehow I'll reduce him. But here goes. When I first came to Ananda, I didn't know anything about Swamiji. I hadn't heard his name. I hadn't read his books. Nothing. There was no context for me. But what attracted me about Ananda, what instantly got me hooked, was, as Karthikeyanji was saying this morning, and is a universal experience. This is not my unique experience. Each one of you have had this, was the people. That sincere, innate goodness. I don't know there are no words to describe it, but just that sincere goodness that I felt from each individual I met at Ananda, in Pune, in Gurgaon, just hooked me in. And at first, I thought, well, this is what it must be when you get onto the spiritual path. This is what happens. This is what happens when you become a disciple of Master of Yogananda. But it was a little while later that I realized, by meeting more people who were on the spiritual path, other spiritual paths, by meeting more disciples of Yogananda alone, by meeting more disciples of other great masters, I realized this is something particular. This flavor is special, and it's not vanilla. It's Swami Kriyananda. This is a unique vibration. And it's the first time I started thinking of Swami as just someone who's here to share Yogananda with us, with me, as someone who has something more. And from there, my understanding of Swami has evolved, has grown, has changed, until finally, when I had the opportunity to live with him for the last 7 months of his life, to spend some time with him, I would say by far those were the most transformative 7 months of my life, the most powerful experience of my life. And I was trying to think of why it would be such a special experience, because it wasn't like I was meditating more. I was thinking about Master, as I always did. I know I was in Swami's vibration, so yes, there was always that. But really, now that I think about it, the thing that was the most was different in that experience for me is because somehow we had to take care of Swami's physical body. I always thought of Swami. I was always thinking about him. I was always thinking, I hope he wakes up and he feels well today. Or I hope, I wonder what he would like to eat today. Or everything was about what would he like to do today? What's he feeling like today? And just keeping him in my mind, that was different. I never did that before, you see. I always thought that I had to think of Master. And I did, and we all do. But this was different for me, thinking about Swami. And I think that's what changed me. Anyone who knew me before, you can ask them. And a whole image, I had an image of Swami, and this image was me and Master, and Swami here to the side, essentially pointing towards Master. And me being grateful to him and smiling at him and saying thank you, and me moving towards Master. But after this experience, after I realized what it meant to also have Swami going in my mind, I realized that Swami is really just in the middle. And he is my path to Master. And he's a unique path to Master. He's not the only. We could circumvent him if we want to, but why would we want to? He's special that way, and he's so accessible. He created, it said when a soul finds freedom, they open that channel up for everyone to join in, to come into it and access the infinite. And just as Master was the doorway to the infinite for us, Swami is that doorway for all of us to Master. And for me, that's the legacy of his that I want to hold on to. He is my unique path to salvation. Through him, I'm going to get there. That's how I will remember Swami Kriyananda. But that's not enough. You can't just leave Swami there. Swami's legacy was also very, very human. And the real word that describes the 7 months that I spent with him was absolute fun. It was a joy. It was always an adventure. I felt like a child again. When I was younger than I am now, I used to read this comics called Calvin and Hobbes. And there's this game that Calvin plays called Calvin Ball, in which the only rule is you can't have the same rules that you had last time. So you have to keep changing them. And so every day with Swami was like that. Every day had to be different. Every day had to be new. He woke up and now I'm going to write a new online lessons. And tomorrow I'm going to write a new book. And then today we're going to go out and we're going to find that one shopkeeper who needs my energy, needs my love the most. And every day was an adventure. And so Swami really took Master's words, life is here for our entertainment and education. He never forgot the entertainment part. But he used the entertainment part for our education. And that's something that I've really appreciated about him. Not always, but I kind of thought the spiritual path needs a little grimness. But it just doesn't, at all. It just doesn't. There's no need for that. And, just 2 little episodes that stand out in my mind of that little time with him that, add to the vast legacy, the vast qualities that Swami expressed. 2 little episodes that came to me as I was thinking about this was one about just how deeply he cared for our spiritual life. You see, sometimes we meditate in the mornings, we meditate in the evenings, we energize, we think of Master every now and then, and we think we're doing pretty okay. Great, I've got my schedule, I'm serving, I'm meditating. What more do I really need? And once we were in Goa, Swami loved to go there for vacation. And we were in Goa, and we came up to his room to get him ready for lunch. And he said, Shurjo, how many kriyas do you do? I said, well, Swami, on an average, around 60. And Swami just said, I'm so sorry that I cannot give you the example because I'm old and even my heart won't allow me to meditate as much as I'd like to. And I'm so sorry that this is the example you're having to see. And I mean, that was him. He could just say, Shurjo, 60 kriyas aren't enough. Jeez. I mean, what's up? What's up with you? But he wouldn't. I was his responsibility, and he took that responsibility seriously. And I appreciate that so much. And another little thing, which is how I choose to remember Swami now, always. It was a week before he passed, and we were having dinner. And for those of you who've been to his Assisi house, he's got his computer and his office right where he eats in the dining room. And so we were having dinner, and in his computer screen, he has this beautiful screensaver. He has two beautiful screensavers. One of all the photographs of Crystal Hermitage. All the tulips, all the beauty. I think the Binghams are very responsible for that, so thank you. But secondly, one other one that he loved was screensaver of photographs, I think, that the Hubble telescope had taken of beautiful constellations and stars in the cosmos and galaxies and whatnot. And we were eating and we were just watching that. And each galaxy had particular shapes and particular colors. And Swami just said, I wonder what color a Tamasic galaxy would have, and what color a Sattvic galaxy would have, and what color a Rajasic. And so as each photo would come, he would, we would guess all of us. I think that's a Tamasic. And he would say, no, I think because, it was just fun. We were having a little fun. But after a little while, he just said, I wish I had asked Master that. And when I looked at him, I just realized that there is no Swami Kriyananda. There has always just been Walters. And that was Swami. It was just Walter. He was just always thinking about, I wish I had asked my Guru that. I wish I had tuned more into my Guru. And I wish I can hold on to that. I wish I could just be Shurjo, no matter how old I get. And I wish I could always think that way, that I wish I had asked Swami that. God bless you.
It's always so difficult for me to speak after Shurjo's talks because they are so great, and thank you. You speak about Swami beautifully. For many of us who came very late in Swami Kriyananda's life, we didn't have that much time to learn from our own mistakes by doing things, having a mistake and having Swamiji corrected us in one way or another. Many of us had to truly feel and to watch and to observe carefully what was Swamiji trying to do, trying to accomplish, which kind of person Swamiji wanted to meet, what kind of energy Swamiji wanted to give in a unique way to each individual. And for us, for many of us, for myself personally, that was the kind of relationship really that I have with Swamiji. That was my way of learning from him through watching every single movement that he did. And it's very interesting because I remember at the beginning, when even before I became his personal assistant, I came to India and it was my first time in India. And that was the time I was just going to be there for 3 months period to see how I will feel there. And many of you may know my English was really bad. And by the time that I was in India, my English was even worse. So that was the period when Swami Kriyananda started to write the Bhagavad Gita. And I think he started, and 1 or 2 weeks after that, I arrived to India. Well, that period, Jyotish and Devi were there, Asha was there, I think Padma and Riman also were there. All these amazing, great souls together were just there, just being part of what Swami Kriyananda was writing, the Bhagavad Gita. So I remember my first day at the ashram, where I didn't know almost anyone, and everyone was talking in English. And I will hear the Bhagavad Gita, and then I will hear the Swami Kriyananda, and I remember myself thinking, what unfortunate, I feel so bad. I'm sure these great souls are talking about such a deep stuff between themselves. Even I'm sure they are even sharing something great that Swamiji has said to them. And I'm not able to understand one single word. Such a pity. And that was my first night at the ashram. Like, what I'm doing here? I'm not able to understand anything. The next day, I don't know if it was Nirmala or Dharmadas, that they call me and they say, you are invited to go to Swami Kriyananda, and he would like for you to read some of the pages that he has written from the Bhagavad Gita. I say, okay, that will be great. I don't know even how we communicate that. So anyway, I went with my bag to Swami Kriyananda's house, and I remember a group of people were reading page by page. So Swami greeted me, hi, nice to see you. And I just sat there. I open my bag and I bring out this little traveler dictionary, English-Spanish translation. So Swami looked at me and said, what is that? Well, Swamiji is just a dictionary that I think it will help me to understand what you are working on. And very seriously, he told me, oh, you won't need that. You will be able to feel it. And later on, I realized that he was not only meaning that I will be able to feel at that very moment that specific project that he was working on. In fact, that is the only true way to understand things, people, truth, as it is, by the heart, by the feeling. And that was really what my life was about around Swamiji. I had to learn later on when I became his personal assistant. I had to learn how to feel his consciousness, his energy. I had to learn how to feel what he wanted to do every single day, what kind of community he wanted to visit, what kind of people he wanted to meet. It was a process of learning how to feel things in your heart. It wasn't about understanding things intellectually, how you can feel everything from your heart. And that process didn't end when Swamiji left his body. In fact, that process started even in a deeper way when he left his body. Because I still need to learn ever more deeply how can I feel Swami Kriyananda in my heart, in my life. I need to attune what is trying to happen, how I can serve this work, how I can serve my Guru. It's a constant process of keep feeling in our hearts. By being here, so many memories are coming into my mind. And there is one very unique that for me, Swamiji, yes, I can speak how great he was, how vast his consciousness was, what a great mission, what a great role in life he had. But more than that, what it really touched me is how much he cared for the little things, for our little needs, even the most remote needs that we could have. I remember in this very house that he knew that I was struggling with my English, and he really wanted to help me, and I did improve. Every time I did something wrong, he will correct me very openly in front of everybody. He didn't care. So I was very grateful for that. But one of the evenings, I don't know what happened, I wrote him an email, someone wrote me, so I had to explain a little bit, what was all about. So the moment I pressed send, like 2 minutes after, I was in his room next to bedroom, I hear, Narayani! So I just went there and said, yes, Swamiji, could you just sit for a moment? So I sat and said, listen, you have improved so much. In your English, you are speaking much better, but your written English is so bad. You seriously need help. I said, I think it was 11:30 at night. I said, okay, Swamiji, I will be happy to learn as much as I can. And he said, let's do something. Every night, before you go into bed, just write me an email. Doesn't need to be long, 2-3 lines. Just tell me a story. You can even invent the story that you want. So you write me a story, send to me. I will correct it for you, and I will resend you that email so you will see what your mistakes are. That was the time where he was writing the book the biography of Yogananda. That was the time where he was meeting so many people. It was one of the most busiest periods of his life. And I remember I had to do that every night. So that process lasts for at least weeks. So every night I would write an email. Today I did this, I did that, and I had a cup of tea. Anyway, just whatever came to my mind. And I will suffer so much doing that because I will think, here Swamiji is, a disciple of a great avatar for more than 60 years, creating these communities, writing these scriptures, this book, giving so many lectures. And the only thing that he is concerned is that I can improve a little bit my language. And that really touched my heart so deeply because I understood that for him, it wasn't a tapasya at all to do that. For him, it wasn't a waste of time. The truth is that there was no distinction in his mind. What were the little things versus the big projects? Everything was the same from him. He saw God in each one of us. And in helping us, he was serving God through us. So there was no divine mission versus divine mission. Everything was the same for him. And for me, that was the biggest greatness that I saw in him. His humanity, his way of taking care of us in such a unique way. That is his true greatness. Things that he will never share, and this is just a little chapter of his life, a little thing that he did for me, but how many of thousands of those little things he did for each one of you. We could even write a book in how many small ways he really touched our hearts. And I know that many of you may think, well, I mean, you were so lucky because you were with him and you were able to spend that time. I wish I could meet Swami Kriyananda. I wish I could be with him. But I could tell you exactly what he told to me that day when I brought out my little dictionary. You don't need that. You will be able to feel him. Just try to open your heart. You won't need Swami Kriyananda's physical form. You won't need Swami Kriyananda's, you will be able to feel him. So open your heart, be receptive, and just God will do the rest. Thank you so much. It's just such a joy to be here. And I'm just going to end. I feel also so grateful for Miriam, Lakshman, and Leela, because even for all of us was a very difficult period in our lives at the very end. And many of you who know the four of us, we were very peculiar in our own things. But our love for God, our deepest love for God, all of us, Leela, Miriam, Lakshman, and myself, and later on, of course, Chaitara, but at the beginning, the four of us, that was the main thing that united us. And all of us is the main thing is uniting us in His name. So I wanted to thank them too, because they embraced me after so many years serving Swamiji, and they found themselves just, Swami throw me in their lives. They did a fabulous job, and all of you, it's just such a joy to be here. God bless you.
It is truly an honor to be a part of this, a member and a part of this great family, this great spiritual family. Attunement was something that more than any other direct disciple of Master that I've met, Swami emphasized that to all of us. And so I wanted to tell a story that illustrates that, and then to segue into another story because it's so important to our lives at Ananda and as Ananda grows. And it's always, of course, necessary to be an organization and a structure, but Swami always picked up the knot by attunement and attunement to the Guru. I moved here to Ananda, and I had a little bit more expenses than the salaries at the time could meet, so I took a job outside the community, lived on the land, but worked in town. And there was a certain point where I went into Earth Song, and Jyotish and Devi were there, and I think having lunch with Swami, and they said, listen, every Wednesday when we do the community meeting here in the Dome, just before that we meet just the little group of us with people in the community. Why don't you come this next Wednesday? So I said, okay. Swami, so we met, and Swami said, maybe it's time you consider now moving on the land. I think the community's grown to the point where probably we could find you a salary that would allow you to work on the land. And he was very interested in the job that I was doing, and he was interested in having it be a community business. And so I said, yes, gosh, I could maybe go up and rent a little space in the yellow building, and that way I could bring bring to the land another business for Ananda. And he let that one go by, but then again we were talking, and I said, well, yeah, maybe I could even grow it to the point where it would produce another job for somebody here.
at Ananda. And that pretty much broke it. And all of a sudden, a huge explosion, literally. He said, my name was Mark at the time, Mark, forget Ananda, just forget Ananda. And there was truly this pregnant pause on the part of Jyotish and Devi and a few of the others. And there was truly weeping and gnashing of mental teeth. And he let that pause be pregnant. It went, and it went, and I shrank, and I shrank. And then I got it. And then he reached over just so gently, and he tapped me on the knee, and he said, on the leg, and he said, do it for God. He said, I watched Master reprimand Dr. Lewis because Dr. Lewis was all a fuddle about something about for Master, to do this thing for Master. And he said, and Master was very hard with Dr. Lewis, do it for God. Now, I had grown up in the Catholic Church, and then I joined SRF. So I was well indoctrinated into the right organization and the only true organization. And so Swami saw that, and he saw it as my personal thing to grow. So he took a personal need on my part, because the next part of the story is that we ended our meeting, we went into the dome. Swami proceeded to give a very inspired lecture on how we all here at Ananda can serve God by serving Ananda. So I sat with my jaw open listening to him and realized he did it for me because he realized that was my lesson to learn. And so just this last week, we have 40 of our community members here from Italy, and we were touring down south in the Master Shrines, and it was Hollywood Church. And of course, we all know that Swami met Master there at Hollywood Church. And so the minister there, he's a fine fellow. I've known him also in the many years that he was stationed at Encinitas. And the minister was asked, well, maybe we could go look and see that room where Swami first met Master. And, well, we don't want the emphasis to be the wrong emphasis. This is where Master talked to the public, and this is where the Master had the intuition to find the windows and build the church. And he was right, but what we all know that story in the path, in that story, very specific lessons about attunement, about will you love me unconditionally? Will you be obedient? Will you give me your unconditional obedience? We also know 2 full minutes. I mean, I had a pregnant pause of reprimand from Swami, but 2 full minutes, Swami said, Master vibrated his finger on his chest to change, and Swami said, I was changed. But the most important thing is that that through that little room, we got a lesson on attunement. And that's what Swami always did, was he taught how to tune in. A very humorous level of that then is that Swami and I are driving once, and as you all know, he liked, and often, whether I liked it or not, he corrected my English. And so we're driving along, and I said something about to error. And there was this, and I finished the sentence, and there was this pause, and then I realized, I just caught it. I said, oh, wait a minute. And I said, okay, Swami, to err. And he laughed and laughed, and he slapped me on my thigh, and he said, very good, because he But he liked the fact he laughed the hardest because really I think I caught his thought. Well, okay, I'm not going to correct him, but it's really to err, not to err. And he really was helpful but delightful. And the last story I just want to, it's difficult a little bit for me to share, but because there was a time we saw him through many illnesses, but we brought him home from Lugano once, and he was really decreasing. I mean, we really felt this was it. In fact, I overheard him in Lugano call Jyotishan Devi and say, I think this might be it. We got him home, and I would sleep upstairs in his living room, just put a mat down, and anytime I'd hear him get up, I would get up to be at his bed to help him, because he became worse and worse. And so but some of those times, and he would get up, he would come out, if you can imagine, here's two men in their underwear, and we would sit in the living room, and we would quietly meditate together, or we might have a little conversation, but it was also at 2 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Then we would get back up, he would get back up, and I would help him back into bed. But as it got worse, then there's this one particular morning, and I heard him move, so I got up to help him, and he just couldn't walk anymore. He was so weak, his whole body was trembling, and but he wanted to come out to his chair, and he says, I think he was taking it from a P.G. Woodhouse, but he said, this is the most horrible night of my life. And he said, it's like the Russian who kills his wife and then succeeds in also drowning his baby, then goes home after that hard day of work only to find that the vodka cabinet is empty. And here is Swami. I'm sitting there thinking that Swami is dying, and Swami comes up with this, and I started to laugh. I laughed till I had the tears coming down my face, and I said, Swami, I'm so sorry. I cannot stop laughing. Here I was, the dying man, I thought, right in front of me, and I couldn't stop laughing, and I laughed so hard that he started to laugh. And then we're both laughing there. And then so I got him back up after that, and I put him back to bed. That was about 4 o'clock. Another 2 hours at 6 o'clock, he asked me, or I heard him. I went and we brought him out, and he sat down again. And he said, I'm back. And truly, something in those 2 hours changed. And then he said, I'm up now, and you go ahead and take your leave, and Miriam and I think it was still Leela at the time, and they'll be here. And then as I was leaving, he said, "Tell you and Kirtani come over at 10." And we came over, and he said, "Again, I'm back." And he said, "I don't want you now to erase any of my appointments. I don't want you to in any way, I'm back, and I want my appointments back. I want my life back." And something in that time changed. I saw that in Swami's life so many times where I just thought, he's gone, and then you all seen it. Then he would return to America, or he would return to India. He would, and so in that same way, and many of you know the story, but it also segues in that one of those times, and he was so ill when we came in the morning, and I said, "Good morning, Swami," and he said, "Good morning, Anand." But when he looked up, he was sitting at his table, when he looked up, his whole body was trembling, and he said, "Would you fix me a spramuta?" And I said, fresh juice. I said, "Certainly, Swami." And he said, and and Kirtani sat down and Kirtani said, Swami, this is when I've become angry, and that's all that she got out, or maybe angry with. No, don't say it, he said. This is Divine Mother's body, and she'll do with it what she wants. And that's how he lived. He just let these things come and go, and I can't tell you how many times I thought we were going to see Swami leave, and then he would pass that. So faith was his armor, and he really did live that way. He talked the talk, and he really lived what he believed in, and he believed in it. And it was such an inspiration to me. And so just on a very humorous note, to bring it up just a little bit, they're traveling, and a group of them, and Kirtani's in the back seat. And they had stopped, and they had, Swami was very informal, man. I became a Kriyacharya and an auto grill. And so we're traveling, and they had all shared a little bit of chocolate and things, and Kirtani was in the back seat behind Swami and said, Swami, would you like a head rub? And he said, certainly. And he laid the chair back a little bit, and Kirtani was back behind Masajini's head. And she said, yeah, this is good, Swami. I was sort of wondering what I was going to do with the chocolate that I had on my fingers. And Swami laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. He really was a man of joy, of bliss, and that's his legacy is attunement, but it's also joy and it's also bliss.
Okay, that'll do. It is amazing how many stories about Swamiji relate to the challenges that his body went through. And there is a lesson there that's because so many of us are intimidated by bodily indisposition and frightened by so much of what we see. And to have that lesson both of joy and of willpower. And I remember Dr. Peter once was testing his heart when Swami's heart was having some wild arrhythmia. And Peter says that most people, when they're having that, when their heart's that agitated, their minds are also agitated. But Swami would say, "There, Peter, did you hear that one?" Just like that. And I was remembering another time when the litany is great. Maybe it was the diabetes episode. Maybe it was when he had the compression fractures in his back. Maybe it was when the blood pressure wasn't working. I don't know. It was, a series of collapses. And he went to the dentist. He didn't have any cavities. And he came home and he announced that he had no cavities. And I, just like Kirtani, said, thank the Lord for little favors. Just trying to be facetious in the moment. Absolute. All humor was completely gone from the room. He said, I thank God for everything. Just like that. The constancy of his consciousness was a really a big learning on many different levels, because all of us are capable of understanding how we ought to behave. And we can even work it out philosophically, exactly why we should behave a certain way. And the process of the path is gradually getting a modicum of self-mastery so that we don't actually say that thing that occurs to us to say. Or we restrain that feeling of the heart. But what I understood about Swamiji was, of course, he didn't have right attitude. He had right consciousness. And right consciousness is, of course, an entirely different reality. It's simply looking at the world and seeing God's presence everywhere. So it was a very serious thing to thank God for little favors, because that meant you weren't thanking Him for the rest of it. And where something like that might just sort of slip through, who cares? There wasn't, no minute was unimportant to Swamiji. And Sergio was talking a little bit about why it was so interesting to be with him. Sergio and Narayani both were referencing that to a certain extent and giving certain examples, and they're all true. You just never knew what was going to happen, and it was always a lark. When Swamiji was talking on the phone to me once about, this was like 1996, 7, 8, one of those moments where his heart was very weak, and we were talking on the phone. That was when he would still use the phone. And he was talking about, I could slip away at any moment. And I had to honestly say, Swamiji, you've already done the work of 10 incarnations, and there's just no way any of us could ask you to stay a minute longer than you feel to. So, I'm only one, but I speak for all of us. When God calls, don't hesitate. And then I had to say, it just won't be as much fun to be on this planet, And he was so serious with me. He said, I know, I've been through it. Swami was 25 when Master died. And that's not very old. He had 3.5 years. And then, not so long after, his harmony with his Guru Bhais actually disintegrated pretty fast. I've seen some correspondence from 1953, which is pretty bone-chilling, in terms of the discrepancies between his point of view and his Guru Bhais. And then, not long after, he was utterly separated from all his Guru Bhais. It's very hard. Look around at this enormous family. We have so many peers, don't we? We have so many people, and I remember sitting with Nitai, and this was already quite some time ago, and I noticed that Nitai wasn't as young as he used to be. And he's just a random example. But I remember looking at Nitai and said, Nitai, look at us. We came when we were so young, and we're still here. That's success. We're still here. And we've been able to do it together. And God knows we've needed each other. How could we have ever made it without the mirror and that hand-holding? Because some of the past ain't pretty. Let's just put it like that. I'm always torn between exposing myself and my friends and just letting you think we were born this way. But Swami did it alone. He didn't have one peer. He didn't have one fellow disciple. And every so often somebody would come who had some relationship to those days with Master, even the tiniest relationship. And he would cling to them. Sometimes just beyond all reason as far as we were concerned, unless you could stop for a minute and realize how alone he was. 3.5 years with Master, 25 when Master left, and he never had a peer after that, except for rare moments, and most of his peers did their best to destroy him. Talk about triumph. But he didn't do it with right attitude. He did it with right consciousness. And when you were with him, you see, he demanded that of you. He didn't demand it of you by demanding it of you. It's that you just wanted to be where he was. I don't mean physically. You just wanted to be where he was. Because, well, it was so much fun in the most divine sense. Because, what is it when you're having fun? I mean, there's other words for it. Freedom is one of it, isn't it? When we're having fun, we've forgotten all the reasons why we shouldn't be having fun. Which is why Swami understood exactly when I said that. Because when you're in the presence of the Master, then nothing matters. And so here we are. So let's go back to ill health, because this was such an interesting story and time. There was a time when Swami was in India. I believe he was having his gallbladder removed. In the process of doing those tests, they discovered he had cancer. There was, because of the 12-hour time shift from India, there was a great many of middle-of-the-night calls and lots of confusion, as it turned out, about did Swami want us to tell people he had cancer? Did Swami not want to tell people he had cancer? Was it? And I was caught because I knew he had cancer. Are we going to be praying for his gallbladder when he really has cancer? And it all sort of happened. And before 7 a.m, I had understood. As it turns out, it was not so clear cut, but I had understood. He wanted everyone to know he had cancer, and he wanted us to pray for him. So before the rest of America woke up, I had sort of sent that announcement out. I'm a little fast sometimes. Not everything in the past is real pretty. But that happened. And then it was done. But what happened was everybody started praying for Swami rather desperately. Because now he didn't just have a gallbladder operation, he had cancer, and we were not ready to lose him. And so there was this, I think we started a 24-hour prayer vigil around the world, and in our temple it was full of people, and they were praying for Swami. And many people afterwards came and told me this. The kinds of things you've heard people say, I won't repeat them all. But for the first time, what they were doing, they were uniting their consciousness with Swami's consciousness. The impetus was to pray for him. But in the effort to pray for him, they were matching their consciousness to his. And many, many people told me that was the beginning of their relationship with Swami. Isn't that fascinating? We just never know. We just never know. But all we have to take care of, really all we have to take care of, and that's all Swami ever took care of, your consciousness. Your attitude will get you to your consciousness. But in the end, it's only your consciousness. And now you see that's what Swami has become. That's all he ever was. But we also had that wonderful person. And I agree with Jaya. It's been 2 years and it's been about 100 years. It's a very, 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 it's the weirdest experience of time I've ever had. On one level, when you're with Swami, it's a moment in eternity and everything changes. And then you look at the calendar and you think, when is he going to come back from wherever he is? And then you realize, no, he's not. So you have to go back into that consciousness. But what a legacy. You see, that's the eternal one. Everything else will last a long time. But his consciousness, especially when we unite ours with his, that's eternity. God bless you.
And with a very simple song that we would like all of you to join us. Swamiji has said, if you want to get to know me, listen to my music. And if you want to know his consciousness, sing his music. So we'll invite you to sing with us a very simple but very deep and powerful song. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. And Dambara will lead it off. And then as I join in, feel free to join in with me on the duet.
Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Truth is the light, so light my way. Truth is the light, so lights my way. Truth is the light, so lights my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say.
Thank you to all of our speakers today. Beautiful. Just have a couple of short announcements, and first of all, just thank you to everyone for working with the major logistics of a weekend like this. A lot of planning has gone into it, but it still needs a lot of cooperation to come off, and we appreciate that so much. So thank you. This evening is the Festival for the Joyful Arts performance in the Community Center, which is the big building near Master's Market. The performance will begin on time at 7:45, so please try to arrive at least 15 minutes early. Those of you who prefer fresh air or need overflow seating, that can watch the performance on a big screen on the lawn of Master's Market, so you might want to bring a jacket if you would like to do that. And then tomorrow morning we'll have our private screening of the movie The Answer. And please note that this screening is not open to the public. It is open to us. The carpools to the Del Oro Theater will depart at 8 a.m. from the market and from the Expanding Light. Please stop at either location to offer a ride or to find a ride. Directions to the theater are in your welcome packet. Thank you all.